Hello and welcome to Mere Mortal Dev. Over the last couple of videos, we've been looking at using Git Worktrees as a way to let multiple coding agents work alongside us when we're coding locally on our machine. In the last video, it was just timed to where OpenAI had released this brand new application for Codex called Codex, and inside of that application, it lets you set up Git Worktrees as part of the workflow, which is great. So we got to look at the first video about how to set them up manually using Git in the terminal, and then also how to do it with Codex from OpenAI. And one of the viewers on that last video, Amir, had asked that we look at how to set up environments as part of that workflow inside of Codex, the application. And so we're going to talk about that because that's a really good next step if you're working on anything even slightly complex. So let's get started. Over here, why don't we just talk about the basic setup, which is, in the past, if we were coding on something, we might have a single repo, a single clone down here on our machine, and that's all we were doing. Inside of that repo, we had branches, and occasionally we would merge those, and then most likely we were pushing those up to a cloud service like GitHub. Of course, none of this is changing, but what has changed is that we're not the only entity working on code on our machine anymore, right? So we looked at last time the importance of separating out all of that work into what are known as Git Worktrees. And so we can get a setup like this, as we saw the last couple of videos, where you have a nice code isolation where one agent can work in this work tree, another agent can work in this work tree, and so on. And all along, they're not really having a dramatic impact on this repo, like the core canonical repo, until you do things like merge those changes in. So it's great. You get parallel agents working at the same time, but not necessarily stepping on your toes or each other's toes in the process. So that's kind of where we left off. But what about something where you're doing something a bit more complex and you need to start thinking about environments? Well, let's have a look at that today. So up here in the terminal, we have just a single small repo. And this repo, the main things that we want to have a look at here in just a minute is the code, the index.js, and then the package.json. So let's just have a look at those real quick. And they're so simple, we can even see them right here in the terminal. Okay, so this is just a very simple hello world server in Node. And you can see we have a single dependency, which is Express, and then a single npm script that's just a start that fires up that index.js file. And then inside of the code file, also extremely simple. If you've ever done anything with Node, you've seen this before. You import Express, you start up the server, put it on a port, and then you create a get endpoint. And in this case, the root endpoint is going to return the string hello world. So nothing crazy here. After that, we're just getting it started to listen on said port. And so why don't we go ahead and get that running now? So we'll do npm start. And it says that we're running on localhost 3000, which is what we would expect. So if we go over here, we can then make a curl request to localhost and we get back hello world. Okay, so that's quite simple. Now, what we want to do is get into Codex next. And you can see over here, I have a project going already. This first conversation is where we got that server set up, actually. But the next conversation, the next thread in this project is where we want to set up our work tree and then have a look at why this might not work as we expect. So what we're going to do is start up a new thread. And instead of letting it sit here at local, we're going to do new work tree, which is what we looked at last time. And that's all we're going to do for now. Note that it's default permissions. We don't have an environment, and we're going to be branching from main. So why don't we ask it to take a crack at adding a new endpoint to our server. I want to add a new endpoint to this server where when I pass in a query parameter for my name, instead of hello world, the endpoint returns hello and then my name. Let's see if it can make sense out of all of that. So what it's doing in the background, like we covered last time, is that it made a new work tree. And we know that because we get this tiny little icon over here to the side that shows that it's running on a local Git Worktree. And then it's going to be working over there to try it out. So a couple of things to keep in mind just to kind of show to illustrate what's going on. First of all, if I just go back to my terminal and I look for those changes, wait a second, nothing changed. Well, nothing changed because the Git Worktree is off to the side somewhere else. And so if we want to see where this thread is running, we'll have to open the integrated terminal instead. So sometimes I might do Command J to open this, but there's also a button up here at the top that we can toggle the terminal open. And you can see here, we're on a totally different path than we are in the main terminal. And that's fine. That's what we expect. So let's just have a look. So we can see here that it's still all the same files, but if we look at index.js, we should expect that there is a second endpoint, and you can see it's added an endpoint that says /hello, and then it's going to pull out from the query parameters a name property, and then whatever's been assigned to that name property in the URL, it's going to greet me with that. Or if I didn't pass in a name, it's going to default to hello world. So why don't we try getting this running? And we'll just do npm start, and we should expect to fail. This is where environments are important. So why did it fail? Well, if we have a look one more time at all of our files, you're going to notice that one key ingredient is missing, and that is we don't have a node modules directory sitting here, because we effectively moved over into an isolated place to work, this work tree. And you can almost think of this like a clone where the node modules are not going to come along for the ride. So that's where we need to think about how we're setting up our environments. And so why don't we get that set up? In order to do that, you're going to go into settings. Or you could also on a new thread create environment that way as well. And so I think we'll go that route just to make sure that it's clear how to do that one as well. So what I want to do here is we're going to spin up a new thread. We'll ignore this work tree. Let's not even bother fixing it because we're going to try the same thing again. And let me go ahead and copy this prompt. And then we're going to start up a brand new work tree. So down here, it says new work tree, default permissions. And then here where it says environment, we're going to create a local environment. Okay, so we got to pick our project. And then from there, what we can do is give the environment a name. I'm just going to keep it like this. That's a great name. And then we can set our a setup script for when we create that environment. So in this case, I just want to do npm install. For every time I create a new work tree, we want to make sure that this script runs, and that means I get my node modules actually come along for the ride. So I'm going to hit save here. And we'll go back to the top, and this time around you can see down here in our new thread we're gonna do a new work tree, and then we have the Codex environments, the Codex envs environment that we just created. So I'm going to paste in that same prompt, and let's watch and see. It may fly by. Yep, there it is, npmi, right? So this time it's doing an npm install when it makes that Git work tree, and that's what we're hoping to see. So let's give it a moment to think. I'll go ahead and anticipate that this is going to succeed and open up the terminal. You can see down here, nothing's changed yet, but now something has. And so why don't we go ahead and inspect it? For all we know, it wrote slightly different code. So let's find out. Let's see here. Interesting. So in this case, it didn't stick it on a different endpoint. It actually just gives me the option to pass in a query param to root, and then if it doesn't, it greets me with hello world. That's pretty smart, actually smarter than the first one, if you ask me. So we're gonna go with that. So let's go ahead and do npm start. And it looks like we're still running somewhere. Did I leave it running on one of these other? Ah, of course, I left it running in the terminal. So we've got to kill the terminal on the main branch and instead run it here. Cool. So let's see, it gave me an example. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna call the server from over here in the terminal that's just above me. And so same kind of thing. Let's go with the curl command, and then it says what? We pass in a query param, it should be name equals ash, and it does it. Cool. So all of this to say that, you know, the point of having environments inside of Codex is to make sure that everything's getting set up properly when you make a new work tree. So for what to do after this with your work tree, go refer to the last video. In that video, we talk about how to take what's in the work tree, which is sitting off to the side, and then get it back into your main canonical repo locally. We won't review that right now. And instead, let's just have a look at why all of this matters in the first place, because, you know, remembering to install node modules might not feel like the most difficult thing, but remember, that's not all you're going to be doing in a complex project. So just to give you a real world example of something I was dealing with the other day. So let's say here, I have a Postgres database running for my canonical repo. So this is another just another thing running on my machine, right? I have Postgres, and then when I'm in dev mode, I have a development server sitting on my machine. Well, if I don't set up, let's say for example, I have hard coded all of my environment variables in my code. Hopefully I haven't done that, but if I did, then what that means is that if I make a new work tree, that's the same code running, and now it's talking over here to my dev server, which is problematic because if something goes awry here, now my dev server is kind of like messed up. And so instead, what we want to do, of course, is as part of that process, you can spin up a new server locally in that script that we just looked at on Codex. So this is one example. So you might create a new database server, you might seed that server, you might have a file that does that inside of the script. And another one that is one that you'll run into a lot is if you have git ignored something like your .env file, that also will not come along for the ride when you make a Git work tree. So you're gonna have to come up with a strategy for how you want to handle moving environment variables or creating environment variables for each work tree. All of that stuff can be handled inside of the environment. So when you're setting up a new environment inside of Codex, this is the place for all of that to happen. So you'll remember that when we first started over here, we just did npm install, but you can imagine that we might do something where we're doing things with databases, we're doing things with setting up environment files and the like. And of course, you always have the option to override depending on the machine you're running the code on. But anyways, this is the basic idea of why environments are important and so powerful inside of the Codex application. And so I hope you get a lot of mileage out of this, and hopefully that sort of demystifies why that's sitting there in the first place. It's going to make your Git work trees run smoothly, make sure you don't have any weird side effects, and really once you get that set up, for you to really get more agents running locally on your machine. So I hope that was clear. Feel free to reach out if you have any more questions about what we should talk about next time. And thanks for tuning in to Mere Mortal Dev.